in a long struggle. In the tradition of Homer Plessy and the Comité des Citoyens, many Louisianians had worked and sacrificed to challenge a system that made racial injustice the law of the land.
I love to read, and I remember going to the library and I was turned away. And I asked my mother about it, and she said I had to go to the colored library, which was a little shotgun house, and the white kids had a pretty nice building as far as I was concerned. So I read everything that was in the little kids' library, in the little colored library that we had, this one little house.
They were entitled to all the benefits of American society, separate but equal facilities with a joke. I remember being in the legislature when we spent, I don't know what the figures are today, but in those days, $125 per student in the white schools and $56 per student in the black school system. It was not equal, it was not fair. We did it because we could get away with it. We controlled political apparatus.
Working against that apparatus were people like A.P. Tureau, one of the first black attorneys in the state. Since the 1930s, he had led a lonely fight in the courts, arguing that the law cannot protect citizens equally if it provides for them separately.
He was the voice of the civil rights movement. He was the legal voice. He was the cause of ending segregation legally.
On the other side of the bench, federal judges such as John Minor Wisdom and J. Skelly Wright suffered threats and harassment from fellow whites for their tough rulings against segregation.
Judge Skelly Wright was a real hero when he didn't have to be. He stood up for what he believed in, and that was the principle that the Constitution protected all of America's citizens.
I never looked on myself as a hero. I felt I was doing just what I should do, what was right. I know how it was when I was growing up. The blacks had nothing. We've got a good long way to go, but we've come a good distance.
Louisiana led the way to a number of important milestones in America's long march toward equality. For instance, Baton Rouge was the birthplace of the nation's first organized bus boycott. Nearly 3 years before Rosa Parks' famous ride in Montgomery, Alabama.
Now, what Montgomery got, it took them 1 year. And what Baton Rouge got was the same thing. It took us 8 days. I think it would be significant to remember that Baton Rouge was one of the earliest cities where all of this happened.
But the more boldly some Louisianians challenged segregation, the more desperately others fought to preserve it.
The newspapers were in favor of it, everybody. We weren't alone. We had control of the government. There were no blacks in the government. It was, quote, our government, end quote. And we did what we thought was the right thing to do. I think we misread it all.
Legislators dumped a blizzard of Jim Crow laws on the desk of Jimmy Davis, who had returned to the governor's mansion in 1960, and he signed them all. Some remember Governor Davis as a reluctant segregationist compared to his militant counterparts in other southern states. Maybe he was.
I didn't see bitterness in him. I didn't see anger in him. I'm not justifying what he did, because I was strongly opposed to what he was doing, and strongly opposed to him politically. But he was in the entertainment business. He was not a hater.
Louisiana escaped the kind of racial violence that ripped through other places in the South, but the state endured more than its share of conflict nevertheless. Some of the worst clashes occurred in the mill town of Bogalusa in Washington Parish, a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan at that time.
I think the Klans had more power over the whites than they did the blacks, because the blacks were determined to go ahead and do what they were going to do.
White community leaders tried to ease racial tensions there by appointing blacks to the sheriff's department. Extremists replied by sending a deadly message.
They followed us about a mile and a little better down the road, and we turned left, and when we got to the railroad track, they opened fire, and it was a rash of bullets, and O'Neill said they're shooting at us. And about that time, he was hit.
One of the town's deputies was murdered, and the crime remains officially unsolved to this day.
I don't think it was just, say, me, it was the job they're shooting at. They thought a black person shouldn't have a job like that. That was my way of thinking, because we hadn't did anything to anybody.
While Bogalusa had been the site of racial violence, the town eventually offered a sign of more peaceful times to come. Led by Reverend A.Z. Young and other civil rights activists, citizens marched from Bogalusa to Baton Rouge in 1967. With leadership from Governor John McKithen, peace prevailed.
All of that was pretty much due to McKithen holding the trouble down and telling state police, you will uphold the law. And so you have to give that to McKithen. He was a civil rights governor.
He asked me how I stood about civil rights. I said, we're attempting to conduct ourselves in Louisiana now where we don't need anyone from Washington to tell us what we've got to do. We're moving out as fast as we can and bringing the Negro citizens of our state in the mainstream of Louisiana life.
The masterful political move that John McKithen made in the whole Bogalusa March is that he brought in state troopers and he convinced the blacks that it was to protect them, and he convinced the whites that it was to keep the blacks in line.
The civil rights era was an extraordinary time in Louisiana history. At long last, the people of the state had begun to bridge the bitter divisions between blacks and whites that had existed since the founding of Louisiana.
You felt very badly about some of your own family members, some of your social friends, not understanding the true movement, the essence of every citizen having a right to participate in the government and to live in a world economically that was on a par with other people, and it was a very divisive time.
People made speeches and said things they shouldn't have said. There was too much emotion there. And when you look back on it, I don't know what frightened us so much.
And so now so much has changed in that regard. So many people have become better educated. So many people have gone into the professions. And I think this has been a tremendous change in our state, because once people take on roles like this, then the change that comes socially is inevitable.
We come full circle. The same place where they made laws against us and all the things they did to us, I'm now able to make a difference, to make a change, to correct what's been done in the past, to show people that you can be a victim, but you can forgive.